Hello and welcome to the i3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography here at the School of Visual Arts. I am Julie Graham. Elizabeth Krist was a visual editor at National Geographic magazine for more than 2 decades. Since then, she has worked with a wide range of leading organizations and institutions, including Leica, Apple, the Eddie Adams Workshop, Magnum, and publications including the New Yorker, the Virginia Quarterly Review, CatchLight, Smithsonian Journeys. Elizabeth also serves on the boards of Women Photograph and the Eugene Smith Fund. She curated National Geographic's Women of Vision exhibition and accompanying book, which featured nearly 100 photographs by 11 pioneering female photojournalists. She has also co-curated 5 installations for Photoville here in New York. And this is a brief précis. An educator and mentor, Elizabeth has taught at the International Center of Photography, at Leica, and at the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University and Santa Fe workshops. In recognition of her leadership and contributions to the field, the National Press Photographers Association honored her with its Outstanding Leader Award last year. Her work has also been recognized by Pictures of the Year International, the Overseas Press Club, and Communication Arts. Elizabeth is one of our long-term regulars here at the i3 lectures, and we are just delighted to have her come over to the other side of this lectern. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Julie. You just gave my entire talk. We can all go home now. But thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And I will say that I have been to many talks here, and I am honored and grateful to be part of such an illustrious lineup. So many stellar names over the course of the last 16 years have been in this series. So thank you, Julie. But my question, since I am not a photographer and I have no stories of life or death, I have no sort of close encounters with celebrity, except maybe for a few of you who are sitting here in this room. So my question is, why am I here? And so, Julie, you know, it's because you invited me and you were very persuasive. So I'm here. But the truth is that I'm looking back over an overview of 40 years, and any of the students in the room are looking at navigating a terrain that's very, very different. And so my only hope is that I can offer some practical advice, that I can give you some glimpses of what's possible, and whether you're a photo editor or a photographer, that you can use some of this information to create a blueprint for your own life in this visual world. Plus, I want to convince you that immersing yourself in images and nurturing lifelong relationships will make everything worthwhile. So it wasn't that long ago that I realized that I could chart the trajectory of my life from numbers to words to pictures. And I'll explain what that means as I go along. But it's an i3 tradition to start out with pictures of your family and your childhood. So first of all, I want to talk about my parents. This is my mother, who was a biochemist, and my father was a chemical engineer. And so I grew up in the Midwest as a Chinese good girl. And I realize this is like blackmail material, but because I am actually the oldest, the person in the back with the cat glasses and the stylish umbrella pins. But I also want to point out that my brother with the ears is here in this room tonight, in the last row. So he's here. But anyway, but the other thing that I guess I'm going to try to go as quickly as I can through my early career, but this is why I say that my trajectory started in numbers, because when I went to Princeton, I started as an electrical engineer, if you can believe it. I still can't believe it sometimes. And this is cheating a little bit, because this is an Alfred Eisenstadt picture from 1969 of Princeton. But by the time I got there years later, the ratio, though, was still 3 men to each woman. And it was full of East Coast preppies, very few people of color. So it was a little bit, stressful. I wasn't the most comfortable person there. But I have many friends, some of whom are in this room, whom I made, at Princeton. I'm really happy that I went there. But the other reason that I feel like it has some impact in what I'm talking about today is that I was very lucky to have John McPhee as a professor. And he was, I think, the first person that I can really consciously think of who taught me about narrative and about the flow of story and storytelling. And so he did it in words, of course, in nonfiction. But I feel like I'm applying many of the same principles actually to sequencing images today. So I give him credit for that. And before I leave college, I want to say that this is a picture of my husband and me, photographed by our dear friend Richard in the hallway of a dorm while we were at Princeton. My husband is here too. You can see I brought everybody here. Okay. So my first job out of college, or one of my first jobs, I had a summer job, which actually was, believe it or not, going around to photo agencies in New York, doing stock research. And that, I think, is where I really kind of got hooked on looking at images. But after that, I got a real job at Harper and Row in the children's literature department. And I was so lucky because I got to meet Maurice Sendak, and I also got to meet Shel Silverstein. So that was like dream come true, So that was wonderful. But I was only there for 6 months because it was basically a production job and I wasn't that interested in that end of things. So then I went to Asia magazine at the Asia Society, and that is where I met two people who are still, just key crucial people in my life. One was Lynn Johnson, and the other is Mike Yamashita, who's sitting here in this room today too. So this was back in 1980, if you can believe it. So then I went to Fortune magazine, and I was there for 12 years, was part of Time Life. And I will say, Fortune, although I knew nothing about economics and I was really pretty bored with a lot of the visuals, it taught me that almost anything could be interpreted through the lens of business, and you could make almost anything visual. And they had actually a really glorified sort of past with Margaret Burke White and Walker Evans as the only two staff photographers who ever worked for the magazine. And they had 8 to 10 page portfolios. So it was really pretty wonderful place to work. And I had 2 inspiring, wonderful, strong women mentors while I was there. First was Alice Rose George, and this portrait, I have to say, is by Timothy Greenfield Sanders, and I love this sort of representation of Alice because it's how I think of her now. And this is Michelle McNally, who went on to become the director of photography at the New York Times. And I know this is a terrible picture, the quality is horrible, but I want to point out that when I was leaving to go to National Geographic, she was showing me why Fortune was still superior. This is classic Michelle. Anyway, so then that was kind of a mad dash, through my early career. But I want to slow down now and talk now about National Geographic, where I was for over 20 years. And I was advised by Rick Smolin, who gave a really brilliant talk here a few weeks ago, to try to put in something instructional in my talks. So I hope this is not too boring for those of you who actually are professionals here. But I'm going to use some of the stories that I worked on at National Geographic as examples of how I think about editing, since that's so much of what I did while I was there. So when I was at the magazine, editors were producers and project managers, and they were responsible for everything from finding talent and generating story ideas to working with photographers in the field, all the research, and then working on collaborating on the layout, everything, capture information start to finish. So things have changed quite a lot since I was there. I left about 10 years ago, but let's talk about editing. And I'm sorry, I'm going to refer to my notes because I just got back from Europe and I had 3 hours sleep last night. I'm so incredibly jet lagged that I'm just afraid I'm going to forget something. So this is a story by David Gutenfelder. And I want to say up front too that I feel that editing is highly subjective. I mean, I'm going to kind of give you my stream of consciousness version of why I'm picking certain images over others. But the truth is that I think depending on your purpose and who you're editing with, there are many different ways you can come to a solution. So David was the bureau chief for Associated Press, and they established the first Western news bureau in Pyongyang that had been there for decades in 2012. And he visited probably 25 times by the time we published, which was just like the next year. So he had exceptional access. And we call this story Reality on a Need-to-Know Basis, because he was basically trying to penetrate past all the propaganda to bring out the humanity at the same time showing the sort of regimented groupthink that the government was trying to impose. So I will show you a series of pictures that he made at various, huge events. Some of them were like the mass games with I think it was 100,000 people. It was crazy numbers of people. But he was always looking for that little glint of humanity. So I'll just show you the different kinds of images from the similar kinds of situations and why I might choose one over the other. Like the first one, it's very impressive, but we were, at National Geographic, a small magazine with a small trim size. So even though we did do gatefolds, this would have required, exceptional amount of unfolding pages, and it just didn't really have the same impact in our magazine. So this is fine, but I'm not always a fan of sheer pattern pictures. I want there to be more of a focus usually. So, and this, shows a lot of sort of graphic range, but again, I'm just not that interested because the people are so tiny. David really loved this image because he felt it showed that no matter how much the regime tried to choreograph anything, there were always sort of these human missteps that you could catch. And then again, another sort of pattern picture. And I did love this one. I love the layering. I love being able to sort of penetrate back to the fellow in the back who's in focus. And even though I can be a real sucker for cute kid pictures, I try to resist that. And there's something about this picture that I found really boring. It just was so static, just with the kid right in the middle. So this didn't do it for me. And then I did like this picture, and David also, just a very pensive, sort of felt like a very human kind of emotion. And then another pattern picture, which again is kind of intimidating. It shows a lot in that way, I think. And then this picture, which I really like because of the selective focus and being able to see people in the background and in the foreground. And I love this picture. It's almost like the people are little pixels, right? They're all sort of showing their colored card to make a whole image. And so this is the layout, so you can just sort of see. And I'll just scroll through it without much commentary. But I want to talk about, in more general terms, when you're editing at National Geographic, photographers were required by contract to send in every single frame. So I had 2 different stories with around 69,000 images. That was sort of the top, count for me. Some of the wildlife people had a lot more than that. So, so when I was tackling an edit on the scale, I always took a first pass and just pulled anything that I thought could be useful. So of course I had way too many, but my brain is kind of going to a more subliminal level. I'm not articulating why I like every frame. I'm just skimming for a real convergence of light and composition more than anything. And sometimes I would go into a Zen state where it was almost easier to go faster. And then I felt like the really great frames would just jump out at me. So, okay. And then as I would move along into the edit, and the photographer would edit by herself, himself, and I would edit on my own, and then we'd come together later. But one of the other things that I would do is I would group main images into specific subjects so I can compare, similar images, even from all throughout the shoot, So, okay. And then you can see, that was always one of my favorite pictures. So to do a presentation for the editors, it might only be 30 to 40 images. So you can see if we're coming down from 25,000 or 50,000 images, every single one really has to earn its place. So. So anyway, that was the story that David did. This is the second story. You can see it's by Reina Effendi, and it's about the Transylvania hay culture, so which was actually sort of coming under threat because Romania had just joined the EU. So I'm going to go through these a bit and then talk about what I look for in a specific image. But here, I just want to show you 2 or 3 images that are similar, you know, women in the sort of traditional garb. So there's this one, which to me is sort of like a Technicolor photograph, like from a movie or something. I mean, look at their shoes too. It's really incredible. So, and then there's this one, which are 2 cousins. I thought they were twins initially, but they're 2 cousins. And then there's this one, which you can see has a totally different feel because she looks so sort of contemplative or maybe a little sad. So, you know, the light, the composition, the moment, it can create such a different feeling, I think. And so for me, what makes a frame truly memorable is not only the sort of immediate qualities, which I just mentioned, but it's also sort of the emotion or the surprise or any sense of revelation. So because I want the images to convey information and be a striking visual and evoke an emotion in the reader. So, okay, so then we have these 2 pictures of these ranchers and farmers. And I have to say that Reina had a real resistance to this one. I think she just couldn't get around that belly, you know, and I thought it was really hilarious. And plus, I love the fact that she just caught the tip of that pitchfork at the bottom, you know, she didn't cut it off. And I love the layering of him in the foreground, 2 people in the background, and then in the very back, that line of trees. So, but the other thing that I wanted to just mention is that I love the way that you can use light to create emotion in a scene. It's almost like you can sort of coat everything in the picture with a certain kind of light, and that really can evoke a certain emotion. So, and then we have these 2 funeral images, and I actually really like both of them. This was a little more close up. You can get more of a sense of the expressions. And then this one, which I'm always attracted to fire. I love anything with fire in it, but it's a little more, you know, disorganized, and the people's heads, I don't mind cropping actually like that, but it's a little messy around the edges. So here's the layout, and just see what I mean about the light. I just think the light is so sort of glorious and celebratory through a lot of this story. And he made it in, Billy made it in. So, but see, the other thing that I love is that I'm editing for contrast too. Like, look at the difference in the scale. Like the size of the heads of the 2 men are so different. And to me, that really helps create that kind of contrast that keeps you awake. It's not that sort of boring where everything is kind of the same size or the same scale. So, and these 2 ladies made it in. So, and again, you know, the people on the right are look a little sort of sad or pensive. So maybe pairing them with the girl who is pensive would have reinforced it to too much of a degree. So, and I love this, where it says, you can see, cooking plum jam, and then there's a still for making kind of fruit brandy. So, and then the light, again, so beautiful. And then I love the picture on the left is actually a washing machine. So they're using the natural sort of thrashing of the water to, you know, rinse out their rugs. And then this was the one, and sorry about that disjointed gutter, but this is the one we chose. And I think part of the reason it works better than the other in this case is because, again, there's that contrast between coming in so close on their faces with a much more pulled back overview of a scene at another funeral. So anyway, that's the end of that story. And then this is a story on the Vatican. When Pope Francis was newly named, everyone wanted to cover him. But David Yoder lived in Rome, and he had access because one of his best friends was the US ambassador to Italy. So I have to say negotiations were still just endless for every situation. So for months, what David would do is he would go to the weekly public audiences, which is why we ended up with 69,000 images. That's one of the stories, one of the 2 stories that I had to deal with that. So And we published 9 images in print, including the cover. So you can see the ratio of how many we actually used. So I won't say much about this story, except that what I'm going to show you first is a whole long series of images having to do with the Pope's weekly audiences, and David going almost every week for months and months, and often, on his own time, even though I kept telling him not to go unless we were paying him. But, photographers always do that because they wanted overachieve, he was just so dedicated. So this one, and I'll go pretty quickly through these, a lot of these. But you can just see the emotion these people have when they see the Pope. But if you look at a lot of these, the Pope is often sort of turned away. You can't always see his face that well. This picture I thought was extraordinary because I thought, here the Pope is blessing a baby that was clearly conceived out of wedlock, right? And I was pretty impressed, actually. So, and then, but I just can't imagine the stamina he must have had, or the current Pope, going through this every week. But so this is a layout. And I will point out, even though this might not have been our favorite image, you can see the Pope's face really clearly. There's a lot of room on the top for type and for the headline. So, and I think sometimes the text editors are really literal. I think they love saying Italia, and that they can do. But I love pictures like this, which have a sense of depth with different dimensions with the silhouettes and the lighting in the front. And then, talking about how he would go in his little, I think it was Ford Focus, because he just was a very modest person. This is a pickup, actually a stock image of when he was in Buenos Aires. He used to ride the subway. And then this sort of gives you a sense of what he was up against, the struggle that he had against the hierarchy. And this is actually a gatefold, so there was a big timeline giving some of the history. And this, of course, is a vertical, so you had to turn it sideways. But David did 360s, he did all kinds of things. So he really did have remarkable access, given how hard he had to struggle at every step of the way. And this was the one we went with, the second one we went with out of that group. And then we got a cover, so we were very lucky. And I just want to show you how David sort of cheated by trying to squeeze in a whole bunch of stills into one 40-second video.
Who's gonna raise these babies that we made? Who's gonna teach them all the things that they need to know someday? To be patient, kind, sharp as an arrow, sticking pretty close to the straight and narrow. Who's gonna raise these babies that we made? Who's gonna raise these babies that we made?
So anyway, I thought that was pretty hilarious. And we did actually run that online. Okay, so now I want to talk about a story for a different purpose. This story is exactly what it sounds like, just a shot of sheer beauty done by Diane Cook and Len Gential, a wife and husband landscape team. And I'm so sorry they're not here tonight because they do actually live here in New York. But let me go ahead and go through the whole story. But I'll just show you the layout. So basically, the society, at least when I was there, they would invest so much money into these stories that they were always trying to leverage the content, sort of funded by the magazine, into as many different formats as possible to sort of maximize their investment. So, everyone was trying to get into the act. When you would do a final show, you might be showing to all the different divisions, like books, museum, live events, television. Everybody would come and say, can I do something with this content? Can I sort of jump in and send somebody out with a photographer and do something different? So. And of course, they were just brilliant at finding sort of all these different examples that had real meaning, I think, for people culturally. This is a Rockefeller estate in upstate New York. So. But what I really wanted to talk about is that besides appearing in print in 38 languages, because that's how many local editions National Geographic had at the time, the story had more lives. So Diane and Len wrote pre-publication posts. This is for a field test, social media thing that they did, explaining about the software they used to predict the light of the moon. And then they did a live event in DC, which was later posted on YouTube. And the National Geographic Museum in DC did a beautiful exhibition of light boxes in the windows of the building, that would just be glowing like jewels at night. It was really lovely. So I also worked on a wonderful project called Women of Vision, which I'll talk more about later. But we included Diane. It was about 11 women photographers. And Len was kind of the secret honorary woman for this project. But anyway, this is Diane's section in the book. And then also NPR and I think some other news outlets did features about the story as well. And that was always really coveted when, someplace like NPR would give you extra publicity. So, and then because all the images that were made for a story, all the selects, and then sort of another batch beyond that, go into National Geographic's archive, and they can be used at a discounted rate by any National Geographic or now Disney, product. So the work lives on in the archive, and some of their images from this story were included in this book, which I did not work on, but I was thrilled when they got some in. So my question, let me see if I can make this work. Yeah, this is a time lapse that they did. But my question for photographers working on projects is, where do you want your work to live? Who do you want to see your images? I feel like every photographer seems to want a book or an exhibition in like a white cube gallery or a museum. But are there other places that you can share your project, more sort of unexpected or more targeted places? Like, have you thought about like universities where there are departments that are studying the subject that you're covering, and they all have, their own galleries, or libraries where they have exhibition spaces? What about public art? There are a lot of airports that will take, submissions. There are academic conferences where maybe you can reach some scientists at a pop-up exhibition. There are live events, there are book covers, there are stage sets, there are corporate collections where you can try to reach curators if you think that your subject matter would be of interest to them. Anyway, so just keep your mind open to all these possibilities. But I also want to talk about one other project which I did not work on. That's the only thing you'll see in here, which I'm just kind of sneaking in. And I want to talk about social activism, because I love groups like For Freedoms, or what JR does, Disturb, Amplifier, and there's this new crew that is really interesting called VJ Bombs out of Los Angeles, which has been doing really subversive projections, very, how should I put it, anti the current administration. So, but this one I loved. This was quite a while ago, but Louis Sahoyas, who was a National Geographic photographer, somehow got permission to project photographs of endangered species by National Geographic photographers like Joel Sartori on the Empire State Building. And so the images were actually 33 floors high, or 400 feet high. And so this got a huge amount of press. These are actually screenshots from the New York Times. So that's one thing to think about. And the only thing you also have to consider is if you are, how should I put it, working for a very sort of purist photojournalistic organ like the New York Times, they are often very wary of hiring people who are involved with activism. So that's just one thought. You might not want to get involved with that sort of aspect of advocating for something, and especially I think when it comes to things like Gaza or Israel, it's very sort of radioactive. So, but the other thing I want to mention to everybody is think about, where do you want your work to live after you're gone? Like, is your work going to have any historical value where it could reside in some kind of archive? This is actually just from National Geographic's archive, which is pretty amazing. I think it has, at the time that I left, it was like 11 million assets or something. It's pretty incredible. But so that was my little lecture about thinking about your ideas as content that can emerge in many different vessels, and thinking of how your ideas and images can benefit the places you approach. So the two other projects I worked on while I was at National Geographic that have had a real influence on me afterwards. One was Women of Vision, which I mentioned earlier, 11 National Geographic women photographers. And this was such a joy to work on. This was the woman who was the head of the museum sort of dreamed this up, Catherine Kane. And so then I was lucky enough to be able to select the photographers and to edit the book and to curate the exhibition. So this is Lindsay Adario's picture, which I love. And the exhibition went to 11 different museums and 3 different festivals. And this was the live event that kicked it all off in DC. And if you'll bear with me, I'll just name all the photographers because you may know some of them. But there's Carolyn Drake of Magnum, Diane Cook, whose work you saw earlier next, and then Jody Cobb, Lindsay Adario, Keitra Kahana. Ann Curry was the moderator. The NBC correspondent was the person who shepherded this live event. And Beverly Joubert, Erica Larson, Lynn Johnson, who I wish was here also. And if you'll remember, she's the person I met in 1980 along with Mike. And then Stephanie Sinclair, Maggie Stever, and Amy Tonsing. So it's a pretty star-studded group. And I was just so fortunate to be able to work with them all. And then I also want to talk about National Geographic's Photography Seminar, which I worked on for over a dozen years. It's now called the Storytelling Summit, or Storyteller Summit. And this is Vincent Musi, who's a photographer himself, but who's sort of a legendary MC, who still MCs the event for the Society. And on screen is Amy Vitale, being her usual charming self. And then this is Richard Moss. This is Chandra McCormick and Keith Calhoun. And this is Claire Rosen. She has this amazing project called Fantastical Feasts, which she actually gathers all these animals around these long tables to eat whatever, the keepers put out for them. And it's not AI. She actually makes this happen. And she does do some tweaks in Photoshop afterwards, but she's done this with like camels, with like porcupines. It's really an amazing project. You should look at it. So, and this is Omar Victor Diop. And I would recommend to you a project that he has done called Being There. And he collaborated with Lee Shulman, who has the Anonymous Project. And Shulman he's collecting all these little snapshots, like people's snapshots from like the 1950s, 1960s. And he collaborated with Omar, who was doing all these self-portraits of these politically important people in Africa. And he got him to insert himself into all these very white situations from the 50s and 60s where you would not necessarily expect to see a Black man. It's a really cool project. So I recommend that. And then I finally left National Geographic. So this was about 10 years ago. And this is me trying to extricate myself after 20 plus years, 21 years. So, and when I first started at National Geographic, one of the sort of variables I could use to track how much things had changed, besides the fact that everything went from film to digital, was the fact that when I first got there, the photo editor's offices were 10 feet wide and 24 feet long. They were huge, but very weirdly long, because they would put layouts on the side of one wall. And then by the time I left, we were in cubicles. So that tells you something. But anyway, and you can see my folder for Vatican. That was from my last story. So, and then a dear friend of mine, Jessie Wender, did this lovely post for me about the fact that I had worked on 108 stories, and somebody, I don't know, somewhere put together, and I don't know if they were just sort of guesstimating, or whether they actually had the statistics, but they decided that I had looked at over 4 million pictures. So this was really fun. But so after I left Geographic, one of the things that happened was my boss, Sarah Lean, who was the director of photography, who was a real powerhouse, wanted to start this organization called the Visual Thinking Collective. And she pulled together the 4 of us, and it was really fun. These are all close friends of mine. And so what really made a difference, it really helped me sort of transition, although I was brought back by the Geographic on contract, because I took a buyout actually when Fox came in. I think it was real shock to Sarah. She was really upset that I was leaving, but it seemed like the perfect time to get out, right? Fox is coming in. But it turned out, Fox actually turned out to be pretty benevolent overlord. And it wasn't until Disney came in later that I think things got really crazy. But anyway, maybe I shouldn't have said that. This is going to be close. Anyway, so, but this was also wonderful because this was a wonderful sort of home base to have during COVID. And so, we were all just really reliant upon each other. One of the things that we did was to collaborate on an exhibition for Photoville. The banner on the left is the one we did on the 4 elements. And you can see that we each took one. Lauren did water, Sarah did land, Shannon did air, and I was lucky enough to get fire. I let them all choose first, and I can't believe they let me have fire. But that was Marcus Yam's pictures, and it was really, really fun. But I also really recommend Photoville. If anyone is interested in submitting to them, it's an outdoor festival in Dumbo, Brooklyn, and they do get over 1,000 proposals every year, and they only choose 85. But what's great is that they charge places like National Geographic, Time Magazine, New York Times, a lot of money, like tens of thousands of dollars to participate. But if you are an individual artist, they will find somebody to sponsor it, and they subsidize it, so you don't have to pay anything. So, and then again, you can see I love working with Len and Diane. Len Gentile, Sig Harvey. This was something Sarah and I collaborated about, the healing power of nature. Oh, and then I also want to talk about educational things. Anytime, this is a banner that I helped work on with Miriam Evers, who is here, and Yvonne Lai, and a couple of other people. And this was for the Eddie Adams workshop. We were able to include 50 different photographers. And Katie Orlinsky is actually giving a talk to some students. And I would just say, anytime you conceive any idea or have any kind of project you want to apply for a grant, or you're, trying to get someone to sponsor it, always think about what are the educational consequences? How can you give back to a community? Because not only is it just the right thing to do, but also a lot of places that are giving out grants, they're looking for that. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. So I was also on the board of the Eugene Smith Fund, which I really loved, but which I actually just stepped off the board, Julie. So because I wanted to concentrate much more on creative projects, and I was doing a lot with Smith having to do with more administrative things like organizing judgings and organizing webinars, that kind of thing, which was great. But I just, I felt like I wanted to have more time. I just didn't have the bandwidth. But they're a wonderful organization, also great for applying to grants, students and professional. So, and this is Eddie Adams. And in the front, you see the 3 of the prime movers, Yvonne, Miriam, who's here, and Alyssa Adams. And then this is a wonderful, wonderful experience where like 300 people get together on a farm in upstate New York. And basically anyone who's a student or who is within the first 6 years of their career can apply to go there. And you do have to, be chosen. So it's very competitive. But the experience of being able to work with some of the leading photographers in the field and some of the leading editors is really extraordinary. And they bring about 40 reviewers from places like the New York Times, CNN, National Geographic, a lot of the leading publications come to review there. So, but again, for those of you people, you can see in the back, there's Susie Katz, who's a funder. There's Alan Chin. There's Camille Seaman. There's Sarah Terry, the late lamented Sarah. Marvin Joseph, Dan Winters, Mary Calvert, just some of the really iconic figures in the field. So, and one of the things that I do, and one of my favorite things that I do actually, is to help Miriam bring speakers in to the workshop. And this is Phil Toledano, who has been doing a lot of really crazy work with AI. Again, I really highly recommend his work, Philip Toledano. So, and then I also help program an event, a summit for CatchLight, which is a wonderful foundation in San Francisco. This is Rafael Villela, one of their fellows, with Anastasia Samalova. And I want to tell you a little bit about CatchLight too, because they have several different programs. Besides their summit, they have a global fellowship program, which again, fantastic. People apply, they usually pick 3 a year from all over the world, $30,000 grant, plus you become part of that community forever. But what I really love also is they have a local fellowship program. Basically, they're funding newspapers to hire visual journalists for 2 years. Places that might be like, weeklies, county papers, places that never had a photographer on their staff before. And they're basically trying to create that sort of sense for all of those publications of how valuable it is to have a visual person on their staff. So it's an incredible program. And they've Elodie Maya Storm is incredible. She's their leader, and she has managed to raise $10 million, more than that, for that program through places like the Knight Foundation and MacArthur. So, and this is the same summit that I helped with, and that's Isadora Kosofsky and Lynn Johnson, two of my favorite photographers who do really compassionate storytelling, and they were in conversation. So that was really great. And again, just to remind all of you, if you're comfortable in front of an audience, can you talk about your project? Are there different groups that would really like to hear about your work? Or can you do fundraisers for groups, that you really believe in? So, and I'm teaching with Mary Virginia Swanson, who is really brilliant when it comes to creating photo books. And if you're interested in making a book, I highly recommend her book, which is in its 3rd edition. The 3rd edition came out in 2023, published by Radius Books. She did it with Darius Hines. Really useful to talk about all the considerations of making a book. Should you self-publish? Should you go with a traditional publisher? But also she has a wonderful website. If you just Google Mary Virginia Swanson, publish your photo book, it has a lot of free resources about listings of photo book fairs, independent distributors, anything that would really help you if you're trying to navigate that whole process. So, but honestly, this is my class from this year at International Center of Photography. I teach 1 weekend a year. That's as much as I can do. Teaching is just way too exhausting. I'm sorry, Julie and Tom, but I just cannot do it. But I do it once a year because I love being part of the ICP community. And I co-teach with Bronwyn Latimer from the Washington Post, who's on the extreme right. So, and I want to talk about one of the students from ICP, because this is what makes teaching worthwhile, as I'm sure many of you here know. Mackenzie Caillet was in my class, I want to say either 2021 or 2022, and she is phenomenal. And she created a whole project called the Gay Space Agency. And basically she took NASA and she transformed it into this sort of alternate universe of LGBTQ, space exploration. And so she is really incredible. And so she's been getting a lot of attention for it. She's, won various prizes. But also, she's been doing live events too. For instance, she is doing a film with Garrett Smith. She's there, he's on stage with her. And so this was at Photoville where they did a live event. You can see they're under the, I forget which bridge this is, but thank you, Brooklyn Bridge. And then, and this was their film. And so because of her obsession with space, National Geographic hired her to go out to a Mars simulation. They not only are running a whole story, it's already online, but in the July issue, I think she has the cover too, but they also did a feature specifically about her online. So I'm so happy for her. And when you see a student succeed like that, that really does make it all worthwhile. But I'm still not teaching more than 1 week in a year. But then I find other ways of mentoring. And this is the Joop Swart Masterclass in Amsterdam. And basically, they reach out to nominators all over the world. I helped nominate a couple of people. One of them actually got in, Kiana Hayari. And I went then to Amsterdam to help mentor over the course of a week. And these are like a dozen of them. And sorry, my math is bad. It's a good thing I switched out numbers. But anyway, they're hiding in the middle the person who is from Myanmar because they have to remain anonymous because of the regime there. So that's what they're doing. But this is in Amsterdam. So, and again, this is Kiana Hayari's work, and she is amazing. She is Iranian Canadian. She's now based in Sarajevo, but she's really well known for her work in Afghanistan. She lived there for many years. And I'm so excited because she has just won the first Sir Harry Evans fellowship, which I think is like $100,000 and like a year of mentorship. And this is through Reuters and one of her mentors, Mei Wong, who's supposed to be here tonight, but sadly couldn't come. So, and this is also Kiana's work because a lot of bombings at girls' schools in Afghanistan trying to crush the idea of women learning. But I was also so lucky to be able to judge Alexia this year. It's a grant out of Syracuse University. And Victor Blue was on the jury with me. Whitney Latore was the moderator, and Bruce Strong is the director of the program. And this is, well, on the right is Denise Keenan, who is another judge. Next to her is Claudia Strong, who's also part of the Alexia team. But standing speaking is Aphrodite Tsaris, and she is the parent of Alexia Tsaris, who is one of the students from Syracuse killed in the 1988 Lockerbie bombing. And it is so sad, but I have to tell you that they have been doing this grant now for 30-some years, and it is inspiring because the family comes every year to watch the judging. And when you see what they have made out of this tragedy, it really is just, you know, so heartrending and yet so amazing. But again, I encourage anybody, any photographer to apply for an Alexia grant, and they offer a lot of student grants, including pop-up grants, especially having to do with environmental things. So worth looking at. And then I work with this publication, which I really love, called Virginia Quarterly Review. And I'm just working with them very informally, but I send a lot of photographers to them to try to encourage them to publish. And it's a publication that is comes out of University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Tiny circulation. So I don't encourage you to get your work in there if you're looking for broad exposure. But I do encourage students and other people to think about it. Any publications that are not like the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Time Magazine or National Geographic, because there are so many different audiences you can reach. And they do, even though they have a tiny print circulation, maybe 2,000 households, they do reach 1 million people online. It's the same trim size as National Geographic, but they have beautiful production. And anyone I've sent to them has loved working with Jen Boggs, the art director, and Paul Reyes, the editor, because they really work closely with the photographer. And it's kind of how National Geographic used to be. Now, photographers at Geographic are not involved unless the photo editor goes to extraordinary lengths to involve them. Not part of the process, but at VQR it is. So this is a cover picture by Ruben Wu. which, for ghost stories. And then Sig Harvey, they took her work, and Jean Richards. And this is a brilliant art photographer named Vic Muniz. I love his work so much. He, I think, has a show right now at Sycamore Jenkins called Brushstrokes. But this project, he was so upset. He's Brazilian. The Brazilian National Museum in Rio burned down at a certain point. He was so upset that he reached out to them, and the museum sent him the ashes, and he created these various photographs of their most important artifacts out of the ashes. And so VQR published that project. So, and this is Alexei Yurenev, who's brilliant, especially when it comes to all sorts of technical and AI things. But a story about his grandfather and his grandfather's brother. And so I also want to talk about databases. I'm on the board at Women Photograph, a database of over 1,600 women photographers created so that editors have no excuse not to be able to find a woman photographer, also for non-binary photographers. And if you are interested in becoming part of this resource, any woman or non-binary person can apply. We take submissions on a rolling basis. We usually judge either in August or September. So you can apply anytime, and then we'll come find you basically when we sit down to judge. You just have to have, and please always have a working website and a link to your Instagram that works. I can't tell you how many times we go to judge somebody and their website doesn't work. And how can we, accept you if you don't have a working website? So this was a database founded by Daniela Zaltzman, and they're a wonderful organization in that they offer grants and mentorships as well. So I was lucky enough to be able to edit their annual from last year, which we actually created this year. Photography is from last year. Cover photograph by Lisa Almala of a father from Mexico with his family in Atlanta who's saying goodbye to his son because the family was so sort of terrorized by all these ICE raids that the family was returning to Mexico and the father was staying here to work. So photograph by Alice Brzezinski, also from the annual, and a photograph by Caroline Yang of her son, a double exposure with the scene of Taiwan. So, is it time to leave? Okay. So the latest thing that I've done, this just opened an exhibition at the Griffin Museum in Winchester, Massachusetts, and this just opened a few days ago. And so I really admire the Griffin. This is, again, open call. Anybody could have applied to this, but the theme is resistance, activism, social justice, and I feel like it was so needed at this time in our history. And I'm so excited by the people that we selected to appear. This is, again, an outdoor installation. So this is actually two sides of a cube. It's like those Photoville cubes. If you just split it down the middle, it's like two different sides. So you wouldn't see them both normally at the same time. Carol Guzzi has been doing a lot on the ice raids. And Joshua Lott, he did quite a bit about the killing of unarmed Black men and women. And the call for entries could have been any time, like historical, could have been back to civil rights times. So we took, a lot of different time periods for the exhibition. And then I'll just show you one more example. Oh no, I guess I have two more examples. Louis Palou talking about politics in Washington. And he actually is doing a column for VQR that was really interesting about politics. And then Daniela Zaltzman, the founder of Women Photograph, so talking about the boarding schools in Canada that were trying to sort of crush Indigenous identity for many years. And then this is what they look like in the wild, the cubes, and Haruka and Bethany. And then Alexei Yurenev, this is his picture with both Victor Blue and Joshua Lott. And then you can see other cubes in the background. So anyway, this is in Winchester, Massachusetts. If you happen to be anywhere in the area, sometime I think until September they'll be up. So, oh, and just to bring you completely up to date, like 2 days ago, and the reason that I only slept 3 hours last night is because I just got back from a photo festival in Norway, which was really fun. And I was so fortunate to be able to share the stage with Jabin Botsford, who is just out, how should I put this? He was one of the entire photo staff of the Washington Post that was laid off, if you can believe it. So they laid off all 9 photographers and half the photo editing staff. So that tells you where Jeff Bezos' priorities are. Again, probably shouldn't have said that. But Jabin Botsford and Hossein Farmani, whom many of you know. Lauren Wendell's here from the Lucy's. He's the head of Lucy's, and he helped sponsor the photo festival in Norway. And then that's James Nachtwey on the right, total icon. So it was a really incredible experience and just very fun, and just another reminder that there are a lot of these little gatherings that like I had never heard of before, which can be just a wonderful experience to share, you know, your project or your experiences with different kinds of audiences. But then I want to basically end by talking about coming full circle. Because remember when I was talking about Asia Magazine in 1980, how I met 2 photographers who are still really close friends. One is Lynn Johnson, who I wish was here today, but her partner is here, but unfortunately Lynn is not here. And she has been working on a project about autism for over 10 years. Sometimes I feel like it's for more like 20 years. And she documents the families and what they're going through. And it's a really extraordinary project. And it's about to be published by Reuters. It's going to be published by VQR. They did an earlier project of hers about cannabis use, which she and I had done some editing on this together, but she actually introduced me to VQR. So Lynn is a really extraordinary photographer who is just so dedicated. She worked for, I don't know, 30 some years. She did over 30 stories for National Geographic. And she and I recently took a bookmaking workshop together at Bronx Documentary Center, which was really fun. And Lynn is in the foreground, and Toon van der Heijden and his partner Sandra van der Dolen were the leaders, and they were really inspirational. And Lynn had her autism work there, but we finally decided to work with her hipstamatic work because she got kind of burned out about autism. She's still going to come back to it, of course, but she wanted to do something just completely different. So each of us took the same set of hipstamatic pictures, which were really fun to work with, just really surreal and kind of dreamlike. And we made 2 completely different books. So that was fun. And then this is a cover photographed by Mike Yamashita, who's here in the audience. And it's about the DMZ in Korea. This was back in 2003. And let's see. Oh, and so we worked together on 2 books just recently. One is about all the stories that he did on China for National Geographic, which is being published in Chinese as a book. And the other, oh, and these are 2 images from a story we worked on the Grand Canal in China that are from the book. So some acrobats. Okay, so I am a sucker for cute kid pictures. And then this is a book which, Mike, you should be so proud. Abrams is publishing this fall. I probably shouldn't say how many copies, but it's a lot of copies. And this is in the book. Love this image. But this is not in the book, and I love this image too. So that happens a lot, you know, when you're an editor. So I just urge you, you know, these lifelong relationships, they mean so much. And people, you can work with them for decades. And I just, you know, really want you to think about the fact that you don't want to give up on relationships. I also want to just urge you all to be citizens of the visual universe. Going to talks like this is really great. Also, you know, here in New York, Penumbra has great talks. Of course, International Center of Photography. The Center for Black Visual Culture at NYU does a lot of really interesting things. The Photo Society, TPS, does great talks online. That's the Alumni Society for Photographers from National Geographic. So anybody can sign up for those. They're great. Go to openings, go to book fairs, go to museums and galleries. I feel like, that's how you stay connected to people. And that to me is the most important thing. And that's kind of how I choose all my projects. And it's so great not having to go to an office and to be able to say no to anybody that I want to. And what I do is I choose things if I like the people and I want to work with them. That's how I decide. And that to me is the ultimate luxury. So to end in the tradition of many of these I3 talks, this is my family. And I'm inspired by Rick Smolin, again, who gave that talk, who showed pictures of his family at the end too. So my husband, Gary, who's here, who's a writer, amazing writer. Our child, Anna, who is a total badass as a force for good, lives out in Oakland. And I guess, I started with the Christmas picture, right? I'm ending with the Christmas picture, so it's full circle. And then if I can leave you with one invocation, always look for the wonder in the world. If you see a door that says section of mystery, open it. And that's it for me.
Thank you. All right, people, it's time for Q and possibly A. We have a few minutes, so hands up. This microphone will not amplify your voice. It's for our recording, so please also speak up.
And please speak up, because I'm very hard of hearing also.
First off, thank you so much for coming here and presenting. This was an amazing presentation. Loved hearing your stories. I was wondering if you ever worked on a project where you worked with a photographer on a certain subject and they went and they shot it. And when you got the full edit of it, that you found a whole nother story within it, and what your process was of sticking to, like, working with a team of either sticking to the original subject or adjusting basing on what the photographer submitted in. Thank you.
So you're talking about a case in which I send out a photographer assuming they're going to come back with one story and they come back with a whole different story? Is that what you mean?
Kind of like if they shot it in, like they did shoot for the story, but you found like another story by chance. If this didn't happen, that's fine. But just your process of working with the photographer and sometimes the communication between you two.
I'll give you one example, which actually I did not work on, but one of the reasons that National Geographic used to do these halfway shows where the photographer would go make one trip and then come back and she would show the pictures, and we'd bring in the rest of the story team, like the writer and social media team, everything like that, to make sure everybody's on the same page. It's because before I even got to Geographic, there was this sort of infamous story on paper, and C.C. Brimberg did all these beautiful lyrical pictures of confetti at the ballet, paper dresses in Japan, paper lanterns in Mexico at festivals. And the writer did a story about the environmental hazards and chlorine dioxide bleach. It was a total nightmare. And they both had to sort of compromise and bring the story closer together. So, because that's the other consideration is, it's one thing to be able to take the images and fashion a whole different story, but you're usually working with somebody on the text side, or somebody with TV, or somebody, with books or museum, or, if you're collaborating with all these people, everybody has to be coordinated. It can't just be the visual side. So, thank you.
Someone else in the back? I saw a hand.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Speak up, Marianne. I can't hear you at all.
Can you hear me?
No. That's,
Speak up for the room. The mic is just
yeah.
for our recording.
The mic
I'm
doesn't
sorry.
amplify within the
sorry,
room.
I'm sorry. Elizabeth, could you talk at all or give us an example of a time where a story went up and down like an ocean? Or is that not something you'd want to talk about?
I can talk about one. Let me just. So, Well, I wish I could think of one with a happy ending, but I guess I'll just maybe this is just seared into my memory because it was so traumatic. But I worked with a really wonderful photographer named Jonas Van Dixon on a story about food. And this was Sarah's idea, actually, to do something about the celebratory nature of food. And I had pitched Jonas as a photographer because we had worked on this beautiful lyrical story about the Russian villas, you know, the datas, or how do you pronounce it? And he had done just a beautiful story. But you have to remember, Jonas is a Magnum Photos photographer, and he went out and he did a really tough story about food production, including a lot of slaughtered animals, and Sarah was very unhappy. So I think eventually she had to put a different photographer on the story. But so I've been thinking about Jonas a lot because I just got back from Norway, and he just went on a round-the-world trip with his family. So anyway.
Yes.
So first off, this was excellent. Thank you for coming. So I'm a student. I'm starting to pitch to editors, mainly wire services. But one thing has never really been made clear to me. Who are photo editors? Where do they come from? What do they do?
That is a great question. And I have to tell you that many students come to me and ask how they can become photo editors, but there is very little formal training. And in some ways that's inaccurate in that many programs do offer training to students who are already in larger, undergraduate or graduate programs. But for people who are coming in sort of just trying to go into that track, it's very specialized. I always recommend the Kalish, which is a workshop that is done out of RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, and it's Kalish. It's the only real sort of formal program that I can think of. Oh, Marianne has a suggestion.
RIT has a formal photo editing program too.
Right, but don't you have to be a full-time student? Or yeah. So, I mean, there are many institutions that do have formal programs, but I'm thinking of something where you just do it completely to be a photo editor and nothing else, kind of. But that's what I recommend. And because there used to be a lot of internships and things, but they're much less so than there used to be. So, but I would say many of the photo editors who are working today started out as photographers. Many of them, have that wonderful training where they understand all the technical things. I was never a photographer. First thing I say to a photographer when I work with them is, I know nothing about the technical end. Don't even ask me a question about lenses or, f-stops because I have no clue. But many of the really great photo editors have that advantage that they've had their own experience as a photographer. So.
Who's next? Don't be shy. This is your one chance to ask Miss Krist questions. Don't make me glare. Don't make me glare.
Okay.
Thank you. Given that you don't have that background, how do you think your perspective is different from other editors who come from a photo background?
I'm never thinking about what it took to make the picture in terms of the technical stuff. Other editors are probably much more rigorous and critical about, the exact focus, the exact light. I respond much more emotionally and sort of subliminally to things like that because basically what I do for fun is go to museums and galleries. I spend all my time that I can looking at art and images. It's just what I thrive on. And that's kind of one of the things that I want to convey also to all of you is how much, that can be such a rewarding sort of undercurrent to your life. But, I think it's wonderful when photographers who are photo editors are able to instruct photographers on how to make those adjustments. But I'm just not thinking about any of that. I'm just responding the way a reader would, basically. I'm sort of a proxy for the reader. It's like when I work with a photographer, I'm trying to absorb all of their knowledge from being on the ground. And I'm trying to kind of give them the benefit of my perspective from like 1,000 feet up, basically. So it's one other thing I wanted to say, Ben, to you and other students, is if you're looking for any advice on submitting a portfolio or putting together a portfolio, Miriam can tell you that on the Eddie Adams workshop, on their homepage, there's actually a webinar that we did on that very subject. And even if you saw it, okay, great. Because even if you're not submitting to Eddie Adams because the deadline is passed for this year, then it's useful just in general terms as well. So, thank you. Yes. Oh, sorry.
You need the mic, or can I?
He's waiting for the mic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi,
Thank
Nina.
you so much for that. Given you've had this tremendous career, I'm wondering if you can notice any changes in the visual language of photographers over time.
Yes. Well, I'll think of that in two different ways. One, I guess I do feel as if there's a real difference between when I started and things were much more kind of perfectly composed and everything was much more sort of classical. And I love that look, but I also really like a lot of the newer kind of strain that I see, which is much more emotional in a way, much more internal almost. Maybe it doesn't have exactly perfect focus, or, maybe things are just a little off kilter or askew, or, not like that sort of golden rule of thirds, that kind of thing. It can be really like just, askew, and I kind of love that too, because I get really bored sometimes with the really classical. Sometimes I find that's the hardest thing to get students to do, is stop seeing so perfectly. I don't know how to describe it, but sometimes they're just seeing like a postcard all the time, and it's great that they've learned it, but then you want to sort of get them to move beyond that and kind of break that habit. That's kind of my feeling. But that's one thing I've seen. But another thing I will say, just from judging so many competitions, is I feel like during COVID, because people were so trapped and having to photograph within their household, there was so much more kind of an internal perspective, everybody looking inside, and sort of, I'm kind of tired of that. I feel like we're a little past that and starting to feel a little more indulgent now. For a long time, I totally understand, and I do feel like everybody needs to have their own perspective that's very strong. But I do think at a certain point, it's like, don't you care about anybody else? So that's kind of, but anyway, so, different people have different perspectives on that, but
Yes.
so.
Hi, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I come from a long photography background. I was a photo editor at the Times for 20 years. I was a supervising photo editor for The Wire. During that time, my point with this is that I documented from 1990 to the year 2000, specific dates, literally, because my project ended with September 11th. I documented the NYPD for 10 years, from 1990 to 2000, because during the Giuliani years, as we know, there was a tremendous transformation in the nature of policing in the city. My mother was one of the first New York City police officers in 1973 to patrol with the men.
Wow.
She was literally Angie Dickinson in real life.
Wow.
So I have this huge, immense body of work that I did over the 10 years. And I've been looking to finally put possibly a book together on it. One of the things that I'm running into when I talk to certain people about certain things is the immense controversy right now with everything, given the nature of policing in this country, between, we all know what's going on. Would you work on I'm trying to put together a book or an exhibition once again. I've had it exhibited. I've got photos in the Museum of the City of New York, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm trying to show how the son of a cop ended up documenting life on the job, as I always called it, during that period of time. Would you wait for a period of this time that's going by where there's so much conflict going on and people view the NYPD and other things in the nature of policing so negatively, to be able to get a book or something out of this? Because I'm finding there's a lot of back and forth on this emotional roller coaster we're on right now.
Right.
Does that make sense?
I understand your question, but I guess my question for you is,
Sure.
how do you know if that's going to pass or when,
Right.
it might quiet
Right,
down? I
right.
mean, this may go on forever, right?
Right.
So
Exactly. So you would just go out there and pitch it to people.
I think it doesn't hurt to at least start the process. Like if you don't have Swanee's book, I recommend Swanee's book, but
Yeah, I
but-
wrote it down.
okay, great. So, but I would really go ahead and start making a lot of contacts, trying to, formulate it, work with the designer, all the different things to get it going, because it's such a long process that who knows how things will change. And you can kind of take advantage maybe of changes as they come. I also have a recommendation for you that if you have a really strong point of view about policing in a particular place, you could think about trying to place an article, if you want to write it yourself, or enlist somebody to write it for the opinion section, either of the New York Times or the Washington Post, which of course, I hope that's occurred to you, because it just seems like, under Jackie Bates at the Times or Chloe Coleman at Washington Post, they're trying to expand those sections. And if you have a real point of view and you're trying to lobby for something,
Well, yeah, my project was specifically, and I always stick to this, it was really specifically about how the son of a cop saw that period of time.
Mhm.
As she retired literally as I started the project.
Right.
And it was a
Right.
teacher at ICP that actually encouraged me to
Oh,
get
that's
started on
great.
this years ago. You
Uh-huh,
probably
uh-huh.
know him, maybe. His name is Alan Frame.
Oh, for sure. Uh-huh.
So anyway, so I've just been, debating on whether or not how I should go about putting this out there. But your talk tonight was excellent, and
Oh,
I
thank you
appreciate
very
your
much.
time.
But I would seriously think about when you come out with the book, I think that's kind of a perfect opinion piece to, because they often are really interested in hearing from people who have that personal connection. And it would be great publicity for the book.
Yeah, because and I'll end with this. There's always the line that I use, that every time something happens, we understand there's a lot of bad apples in every
Yeah.
group of organizations
Sure.
like this. Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
We just have a few more minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's so wonderful to see
Hi,
you.
Najat. I can't hear you at all.
Hi. Oh, I'll get louder.
Good.
I can get louder.
Yeah.
You don't have to ask twice. I am curious about your thoughts about where we're going to balance photography and photojournalism with AI, and that balance. Using it to our advantage, but making sure those images are legit.
Okay, well, since I can't see into the future, I'm not a good person to ask, but I will say that I really love what some of the photographers are doing with AI. I think it's like somebody like Phil Toledano. I think it's really cool, really interesting. Alexia Grants is doing various things with like machine learning and, different aspects of that. I think, as long as it's used in ways where it's clear that we're not replicating reality, I'm really interested in it and I like it. But of course, the fear is that bad actors can use it to create anything. And as Fred Richin says, and I love to read him, he's such a knowledgeable person about AI. And by the way, he just won a Guggenheim with Stephen Ferry, so I'll be doing really interesting work, I think, in future. But I guess, the real fear is that we have no sense of reality anymore, right? We don't know what we can believe and what we can't believe. So it means that if there is some horrendous disaster and children are dying, somebody could say it's not real, and we don't know whether we can believe it or not. So that is, of course, the horrible thing. And I realize it's also very, very difficult for photographers, because there are going to be some organizations that are not going to go to the trouble of hiring someone and sending them. They're just going to say a verbal prompt and get an image. So, can you do?
Any more? Last one? No?
All right, let's give it up for